Hello and welcome to the Mario Kart Wii 200cc World Record Review for January and February of 2025. This is a brand new series that will hopefully shine more light on 200cc time trials. 200cc is a game mode that was added to CTGP on January 5th, 2019. Things have come a long way since then with multiple new strategies and glitches that have been pulled off in the past year, along with other discoveries that have yet to be done in real time. The 200cc time trial scene has gotten increasingly more interesting to watch over the past couple of years, so hopefully you'll consider giving it a try. I want to give a big shout out to Enmead. His monthly world record review series was a huge inspiration for me to make this video, and you should definitely go check out his channel. With that being said, there were 20 world records set across 6 different tracks in the first 2 months of 2025. Let's get right into it. On January 3rd, Canadian player Boshi set a 138.799 on N64 DK's Jungle Parkway, beating the previous world record of 138.826 set by British player Haya. 3 weeks later, on January 24th, Haya reclaimed the world record with a 138.787, beating Boshi by 12 milliseconds. Starting off with Boshi's run, this is the first time they've held the world record on this track, and this is now their 9th unique track overall. In this run, Boshi changes the shroom strat, using all 3 shrooms on lap 1. The first shroom is used in the grass to cut off the straightaway after the cannon. Using the shroom here has been theorized in the past but never been done in world record runs before. The lap 1 overall is pretty solid for Boshi standards. The other 2 mushrooms are used at the end of the track for the standard 2 shroom shortcut. The previous world record did the usual 2 shroom shortcut on lap 1, but instead held the last mushroom for lap 3, where he did the ending shortcut with 1 mushroom. Boshi explains that the 1 shroom ending cut looked pretty hard and didn't want all of their runs to come down to whether or not they can get the super precise lap 3 mushroom. Shrooming in the grass on lap 1 was easier and more consistent for Boshi, and they knew that the record was improvable, so they went for more consistent strats even if they were a bit slower, which I completely understand. The 1 shroom ending shortcut is much more difficult than it looks, and it comes at the very end of lap 3, so at the moment it makes a lot of sense to avoid it while there's still plenty of time to gain in other places. As for lap 2, Boshi says that it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. The biggest time loss that I can see on lap 2 is getting a bounce on the first turn. The mushroom boost from the shortcut tends to make the first turn a bit more difficult than usual. It's not the biggest time loss in the world, but it loses a decent amount of time over sticking to the grass and getting a tight first turn. In Boshi's words, the lap 3 was horrible, and the run was carried by the lap 1 cut, which just goes to show how much more the track could be pushed down if someone was willing to take the time. One of the more notable mistakes on lap 3 is getting sent too far right from the turn skip. This turn can be very unforgiving with where it sends you, or just completely sticking to the grass and not getting air at all. Luckily, Boshi was able to get their mini turbo out and not lose too much time. After Boshi got beaten, they commented that they don't think it would take long to reclaim the world record, so it's possible, but they don't have interest in it at the moment. Either way, congrats on improving the world record and setting your first on N64 DK's Jungle Parkway. Moving on to Haya's 138.787. Haya opted to use the same strategies as Boshi for the same reason: consistency. He says that he isn't sure whether shrooming after the cannon or the 1 shroom ending cut is faster, and that they're actually pretty close. Looking at the run, there are a few notable mistakes. First off, he misses the mini turbo exiting the grass cut. This lost quite a bit of time, as you can see in the ghost comparison. The 2 shroom cut at the end, however, gained a good chunk of time over Boshi. Haya got quite a favorable bounce off the wall, which allowed him to use his mushroom a lot faster compared to Boshi. As you can see, the bounce you get off the wall really determines how fast or slow the cut is going to be. If the bounce is not as favorable, you'll have to wait longer before you're able to use the mushroom. Now, as I said before, the turn skip can be pretty unforgiving. As you can see, Haya hits the grass here, exiting the turn skip, and loses quite a bit of time. Still, he managed to stay close behind the record, being 227 milliseconds behind going into lap 3. Here you can see the time gained from taking the turns as tight as you possibly can. Haya slowly gains time on Boshi after the turn skip till the end of the run. It's a very interesting comparison. Haya says with a really optimal 2-string shortcut and better overall driving, a 137 would be possible. However, it's very unrealistic because of how sparsely you even get a decent 2-string shortcut. He goes on to say that a mid to low 138 is sure to happen, but he doesn't think it'll be by him, as this is quote unquote the worst 200cc no glitch time trial. That is very understandable, as all the shortcuts on this track definitely make it not the most enjoyable track to play for sure. But congrats to Haya on reclaiming his world record on N64 DK Jungle Parkway, and I promise this won't be the last time you'll be hearing his name in this video. Moving on to Koopa Cape No Glitch, there was a total of 7 world records set by 3 different players, all in the month of January. Let's get into it. On January 4th, Haya set a 137.692, improving the previous world record of 137.768 by 76 milliseconds. 3 days later, on January 7th, I reclaimed the world record with a time of 137.591. Later on that same day, a third player would enter the battle. British player Kobe would set a time of 137.396. This run lasted for 4 days, as on January 11th, I reclaimed the world record once again with a time of 137.335. 8 days later, Haya reclaimed the world record with a 137.243. This time wouldn't last long though, as on the same day, Kobe came back and set a 137.188. And closing out the Koopa Cape activity on January 21st, Kobe improved upon his own world record and got the first sub 137 time on Koopa Cape No Glitch with a 136.878. We have quite a lot to go over here, so I won't be going over every single detail. Starting off with Haya's 137.692, he says that this track is one that's just kinda confusing because the time saves feel so random. Going into some of the strats, Haya goes for a wheelie over this patch of grass, which saves a decent amount of time over hopping over it, which is what I do in my previous world record. Right after that, Haya does another different strat. That being releasing the mini turbo before going down the pipe, as opposed to holding the mini turbo and releasing it when you land at the bottom of the pipe. Haya says doing this saves around 50 milliseconds, but at the cost of adding more difficulty to an already difficult track. He goes on to say that it really wasn't worth the time save and stopped going for it in future runs. I definitely agree with Haya there, as there was still plenty of other areas with much larger time save to be had. Moving on to my 137.591. Aside from the lap 2, this was a very solid run for my standards. At this point, I started wheeling over the grass cut, knowing that it just saved too much time for me not to do it. Getting a 32.442 lap 1 is really solid for me. However, lap 2 is when things really went wrong. It started off with me having to wheelie turn to be able to go off the ramp, which lost a good amount of time. Then following that up with a bounce landing, which lost some more time. Now, doing the counter drift here is pretty tricky, as it can lead to bouncing quite a lot and making the turn thereafter very wide as a result. And that can lead to you having to hold your mini turbo in the grass for longer. So overall, this section can lead to large amounts of time loss, which is pretty much out of your control. The biggest time loss of this lap was definitely the rock bounce at the end. The rock bounce is notoriously a very difficult strategy and often is what ends many runs. To perform this strat optimally, you want to be somewhere around here when you go off the ramp and hit right around this corner of the rock to get shot straight down. I was quite a bit too far to the left when going off the ramp, which resulted in me getting sent down a bit slower, which leads me to land when the bike is not back on its wheels yet. When I slow it down, you can really see how much time this loses compared to landing on your wheels. Another thing to note is the shroom timing. As you can see here, I shroom too late and lose a good chunk of time. You don't want to shroom too early either, as you can just go flying into the wall. The ending of my lap 3 is a good example of what a good ending should look like. Alright, moving on to Kobe's 137.396. First off, I want to talk about Kobe's history with the track. Kobe first got the world record on January 23rd of 2024 with a time of 138.081. This record would last for 4 days as he got beaten by Haya. 5 days after that, Kobe set a 137.947, which was second worldwide at the time and only 8 milliseconds off the world record. I thought for sure he would get the record back. but after he set that time, things just went silent. It wasn't until January of this year, when activity picked up, it seemed like he regained the interest to go for the record again. So to see him come back and set the 137.396 was a really cool story to me. Also, another cool fact, Kobe has 10th worldwide on this track on 150cc, so he definitely knows what he's doing when it comes to Koopa Cape. Diving into the run, it's very consistent with no major flaws. The most notable flaws are the bounces he gets on laps 1 and 3. Bouncing here loses around 50 milliseconds per lap. Looking at the rock bounce, his lap 1 and 2 were pretty solid. On lap 3, he goes a little wide and shrooms a bit too late, resulting in not having the best ending. Overall, a pretty strong run. Now, moving on to my 135.335. There isn't really much to say here other than I had a really sketchy ending with the zappers that costed me a 137.2. Overall, this run had average driving and no huge mistakes, but definitely could have been better in some places. I was just happy to get the record back at the time. And I was surprised to see that it lasted 8 whole days considering the activity on Koopa Cape at the time. This time is still my PB to this day. I know I have potential for a 136, and I may come back to try and reclaim the world record one day. However, it's not a huge priority at the moment. Next up is Haya's 137.243. He didn't really have much to say about this run. Similar to my 135.335, it was a pretty solid run with no major mistakes. Haya says that this track is frustrating to play, so he's not sure whether he'll go for the record again, adding that Kobe's 136 is quite a strong time now. But congrats Haya on your improvements here this month. Wrapping up Koopa Cape, we have Kobe's 137.188 and 136.878. The 137.188 is the first world record on this track to have a 32.1 lap. The lap 1 in this run has some mistakes such as getting a bounce after going off the first ramp, getting some weird air from going off the side of the pipe, and having a bit of a slow ending. He made up most of the time on lap 2 however with really good driving all around, highlighted by a really nice hairpin turn which gained some time over the previous world record. The 136.878 has really good driving all around, setting the fastest lap 1 and lap 2 in a world record, the 32.384 and a 32.087 respectively. Kobe believes that the main time loss on lap 3 was from not getting the slip after the rock strat before the shroom. Combined with not having the best recovery from that, it caused a very wide last turn, losing a pretty decent amount of time. He goes on to say that the track can realistically go down to a 136.4 with the current strats, possibly even a 0.3 with very good driving, but due to Koopa Cape's inconsistency, it would be very difficult to achieve in his opinion. Kobe is currently working on improving his 150cc Koopa Cape PB, but does have plans to improve his 200cc record after getting a 217.8 on 150. Overall, Kobe is pleased with where his time stands despite the bad lap 3, as he knows that he was nervous on that run and was just happy to close out a 136. I would not be surprised at all if this record were to last for quite some time. The difficulty of the strategies and the standard that Kobe has pushed this track to are definitely a strong deterrent for anyone trying to get the world record here. Huge congrats to everyone involved for collectively bringing down the world record over a whole second within a month's time. Really great work. Now we head to DK Summit. On January 7th, American player Day E set a 112.362, beating the previous world record of 112.466 set by myself by 104 milliseconds. 2 days later, Day E improved upon his own world record with a time of 112.243. This run would last for 6 days when on January 15th, Haya would return to DK Summit, setting the first sub 112 with a 111.886. Now, if you've never seen a 200cc world record on DK Summit, you're in for a real treat. There are 2 strategies that are the main source of resetting your run. That being the massive turn skip right after the cannon, which leads into the recently implemented double shortcut. These 2 strategies are where most of your time loss or time save will come from. Day E's 112.362 had a really good pace going into lap 3. being 456 milliseconds ahead of the previous world record. The major mistake on lap 3 being missing the wheelie cut after the cannon. Going through the invisible wall in a particular spot will lead you to be in a wheelie as you're falling down the track. Not getting a wheelie here is normally a run killer, and Day-E estimates loses around 0.3. He is still ahead but has a wide entry to the double cut and ends up falling behind the former world record. His saving grace, however, was the wheelie zipper. Wheeling on the zipper saves around 100 to 150 milliseconds, but is a little risky. I chose not to go for it in my previous world record, so as you can see, Day-E goes right by and reclaims the world record for the first time since the implementation of the double shortcut. For those of you that don't know, the double shortcut was not done in world record runs until February of last year. But before then, Day-E was dominant on this track, setting 9 world records in the span of a year and having over a 2-second gap over second place at the time. Now I know 200cc can be pretty wacky, but for a no glitch track, that's pretty insane. The double shortcut was first brought up by Boshi when they shared this clip on February 4th, 2024. The idea of doing a double shortcut had been around for a while, but no one had ever given it serious attempts until then. After that clip was shared, multiple players were playing the track, going for worldwide tops, and possibly even the record. The next day, Haya would get the first world record with the strat, with a 1:14.238, where he used Daisy Mach Bike to make the double shortcut easier. Sometimes in speedrunning, it's the most obvious things that we look over. Trying to think outside the box for new strategies when there's an easy answer right in front of us. Now looking at Day-E's 1:12.243, it was the opposite of his last record. He had a much slower pace, but clutched out a solid lap 3. Day-E points out that even with that lap 3 being nearly the best lap out of his 2 improvements, it still had some flaws. He says he had a really safe setup for the shortcut and a horrendous zipper. On both laps 1 and 2, he misses the boost panel after the double shortcut. With this in mind, along with the other mistakes in these runs, Day-E believes a high to mid 110 isn't too realistic to be hit in the future. I definitely agree with this considering Day-E recently hit a 23.3 lap 2, which is just truly insane. He goes on to say that this category is very cool since it's super tech heavy and is shorter than most driving tracks on 150cc. It gives way for huge potential in spite of it being so short, and that a decent chunk of the track is cannon time. It's a fun synthesis of short tracks and tech tracks which doesn't really exist on 150cc regular tracks. It's always great to hear people's perspective on how they view certain tracks. Day-E would like to reclaim the world record at some point, but there are other categories that he wants to do well in before he goes on a deep dive again. Congrats to Day-E on your 2 improvements here in January, and good luck on all your time trial goals. Moving on to Haya's 1:11.886, subbing 112 here is a pretty massive milestone. About a year ago, we knew there was potential for a time like this, but it still seemed pretty far-fetched. With that in mind, there are rather noticeable mistakes in this run, which is pretty shocking for a time like this. Starting off on lap 1, Haya misses the trick off the mound when landing from the turn skip, losing around 150 to 200 milliseconds. At the start of lap 2, Haya takes the first turn too tight and hits the wall as a result. Haya estimates this lost over 300 milliseconds. The reason this didn't completely kill the run is because you enter the cannon shortly after the first turn. If this happens before a straightaway, you would lose way more time because you would have to re-wheelie, which takes a few seconds to get back up to full speed. Despite this, the rest of the run was really clean, getting good turn skips, clean mounts, and solid double shortcuts. Haya mentions Day-E's 23.3 lap 2 and is just as amazed as I was with just how insane of a lap that is. He thinks that a low 110 and maybe even a 109 is possible, but would be crazy. Haya's best lap is a 23.5, so he may return to grind out a 110, but it's such a mind-numbing track for him. However, if he does get beaten, that might motivate him to play. Congrats Haya on your DK Summit world record. Next up in the action-packed month of January is probably my favorite track to time trial on 200cc. The first improvement on Daisy Circuit comes from myself. On January 19th, I set the first sub 102 time with a 1:01.987. Later on the same day, with the help of some new strategies, Haya set a 1:01.926 and later improved to a 1:01.914 on the following day. The day after that, I reclaimed the world record by 225 milliseconds with a time of 101.689. The trend of being beaten on the same day continued, with Haya later setting a 101.574. Starting off with my 101.987, I always wanted to get the first 101 with the strats that the world record did at the time. 2 days before I set the 101, I was time trialing Daisy Circuit when I realized something about the staircase. Sometimes when you release the mini turbo into the staircase, you stick to it, which causes you to slow down. Usually I would just reset the run when this happens, but sometimes I would keep going and trick off the ramp and shroom later in the tunnel. I would get pretty decent laps with this strat, some even still being world record pace. I thought at best it was even with the current strats, so I would never intentionally go for it. But on this day, I started to go for it more often than I normally do, and I started to get some really fast laps. At this point, I knew I couldn't deny the strat any longer. I decided I would try to get a 101 without tricking on the ramp first, and then try to bring down the time as far as I can with the new strat. That brings me to the time you see now, being the first sub 102. It's a pretty solid run for the strats used in my opinion. But now moving on to Haya's improvements. This is the first run to show off the new strat. And right off the bat, you can see the time save with Haya just flying past me in the tunnel. The time loss in this run comes from a small bounce landing on lap 1, along with falling off the curb at the end of the lap, hitting some dirt on the staircase on lap 3, as well as falling off the curb again. His 101.914 had much of the same mistakes, hitting dirt on the staircase, bouncing on the landing, and a really sketchy lap 3 beginning. Moving on to my 101.689, the run had its mistakes, which I'll get into, but overall, I was very happy with the time. It felt very good to get a clean run so soon after starting to go for the new strat. Now, on lap 1 entering the tunnel, I hit 3 cones, which loses around 50 to 100 milliseconds. I also got an unfortunate slip at the end, causing me to fall off the curb. I would estimate falling off the curb loses around 50 to 75 milliseconds, depending on how long you have to hold your mini turbo. On lap 2 and 3, I opt not to go for the curb hop, as it's a mostly QM strat and I knew that it wasn't necessary to get a good time, as it only saves around 75 milliseconds if you get a good one. At the end of lap 3, I get a slip once again, but managed to stay on the curb. However, I was heading directly into the pole and I didn't want to risk the lap not counting by hitting it, so I hopped to the left, which lost some time. I've been time trialing Daisy Circuit on and off since I got beaten, and recently improved to a 101.597. I definitely would be happy just to reclaim the world record, but I would like to bring it down to around a 0.3 or a 0.2, which I think is definitely doable. Moving on to the current world record on Daisy Circuit, Haya's 101.574. Haya says this run is very sloppy for him, pointing out that he falls off the curb on lap 1 and bounces on the ramp landing lap 3. He goes on to say that a very low 101 will come eventually, and it's something that he would like to try sometime since he's almost hit 0.2 lap 2s. He says he's not sure if a 1 minute time is possible, but he can't write it off. I agree, a 1 minute time might not seem that likely right now, but I definitely don't doubt that it can be done eventually. Congratulations once again to Haya for your world records here this month. Heading now to Bowser's Castle, we had activity on the glitch and shortcut categories in January and February. Starting off with the glitch category, on January 31st, American player ADC improved his own world record by almost an entire second with a time of 120.067, just missing out on the first 119. This is one of the most difficult categories with all the strategies you have to perform. If you've never seen a glitch run on Bowser's Castle before, let me quickly break down all the strategies. You first do the left side half pipe shortcut, then drive normally to the end of the track where the geysers are. You then shroom and trick off this geyser right as it grows from the ground and maneuver yourself when you land back on the track. You then do the shroomless ending shortcut and have to pivot and trick off the geysers so you don't go off the track. Then on lap 3, you have to do the left side shortcut again, as well as the shroomless ending cut. I can't even begin to imagine stringing together all of these strats in just over a minute's time. Looking at the left side half pipe shortcut, ADC says it's around a 6 out of 10 in difficulty. He usually makes it around half of the time. This shortcut is a run killer for both categories, he says, as he's had runs where he had everything go right for the first 2 laps, but then missing the left side half-pipe shortcut on lap 3. This is one of the reasons why this category doesn't have improvements that often. Now for the glitch, ADC uses all 3 mushrooms to make it, however, it is possible to make it with only 2. ADC says making it with 3 mushrooms is hard enough, but doing it with 2 would be extremely difficult, as you pretty much just have to get lucky. Something else to note is that you have to launch off the geyser before the timer hits 31.5 seconds. Otherwise, you'll hit the lava. You also can't hit the geyser too early, or you'll just hit the wall. By the end of lap 3, you'll notice that ADC is still behind his former world record. He makes up a ton of time by doing the shroomless ending shortcut, which his former world record doesn't go for. ADC sees the glitch category going to a sub 120 and maybe even a sub 119 if the 2 shroom glitch is implemented. Moving on to the shortcut category, on February 7th, ADC improved his own world record by 1.7 seconds with a time of 1:30.380. Similar to the glitch category, the shortcut category doesn't have records set often. ADC's former world record lasted for 1,016 days and is the 12th longest lasting 200cc world record. If you're a little confused about the categories, there are 4 tracks on 200cc that have 3 different time trial categories. Those being Coconut Mall, Grumble Volcano, Bowser's Castle, and N64 DK's Jungle Parkway. For Bowser's Castle, the glitch category is unrestricted, free to use any strategy to go as fast as possible. The shortcut category is pretty much the same, except you can't use any ultra shortcuts, but this still allows things like the half-pipe shortcut and the ending shortcut. And the no shortcut category can't use any glitches or big shortcuts. Looking at the run itself, the ending shortcut looks a bit different compared to the glitch category. ADC uses his mushroom really early on, goes out wide, and then cuts back to the left to cut off as much of the turn as possible. The cut he gets on lap 1 is a really good example of how to do this properly. On lap 2, you can see how difficult this shortcut can be. He doesn't get the bounce landing, which sends him all the way to the dirt, losing a considerable amount of time. ADC says he thinks this category can go to sub 130 or even sub 129, especially if the ending shortcut goes really well. ADC certainly wants to improve his runs, but if he can't, he'll be fine with that too, encouraging other players to try and beat his times on both categories. Congrats to ADC on both of your improvements on both categories. Wrapping up the activity, we head to GBA Bowser Castle 3 shortcut. On February 18th, Haya improved upon his own world record with a time of 1:23.194, beating his former world record by 565 milliseconds. For this category, you use your mushroom off the last platform to do the shortcut. It is possible to do the method used in the 150cc world record, however it is much more difficult. Haya has made the shortcut using this method before, with his best lap being a 26.7 lap 1, which is over a second faster than the lap 1 in the current record, meaning that we could potentially see a 120 time with a 3 out of 3. Haya came back to Bowser Castle 3 because he wanted to implement the faster shortcut method on lap 1 for a 1 out of 3. While just doing some runs to de-rust, he ended up setting this run you see here. He ended up only playing for a few hours and didn't make the faster method once, which just goes to show the difficulty of it. Haya still wants to come back to get a 1 out of 3 one day and get a 122 time. I'll be looking forward to seeing it being implemented one day. Good luck on your future attempts here, Haya, and once again, congrats on the world records so far this year. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. This video took quite a long time to make, so if you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. It really helps the channel.